Welcome to a recorded shir on my way in Chutz La'aretz, being recorded in a very special chair in Toronto. I'm looking forward to returning to Eretz Yisrael and returning to giving the shir live in Kilat Chaverim in Nachlaot Yerushalayim. But meanwhile, Baruch Hashem, I've been having a wonderful trip and meeting wonderful people and learning wonderful things. The Shem Mishmuel in this week speaks about a very puzzling pasuk and a drush of Chazal on that pasuk. The pasuk says, "Boni matem laHashem Elokechem." You are children of Hashem, your God. Lo tizgodedu. You should not cut yourselves. V'lo tasimu karcha bein einechem lemes. And you should not tear out your hair over mourning for someone who has died. Now, the Gemara in Yevamos, and Rashi brings this down as well, brings a drasha on the word lo tizgodedu. Tizgodedu, the verb itself literally means to cut up. But they said it also means lo tasu agudos, that you should not cut yourself into distinct and separate groups. Now that actually has applications in halacha and in terms of the idea of minhag hamokum, of the custom in a place and how it's supposed to be done. Now, the question, which is Shem Mishmuel asks, is what is the connection between the two perushim in the pasuk? There's got to be some connection between the drasha of Chazal about dividing yourself up into different groups and the idea of cutting yourself in despair over someone who died. Lo tizgodedu, as I mentioned, does have applications. Just recently, I davened in a Sephardi shul near my house before Tisha B'Av, and the Rav announced that the custom in their shul is to wear talis and tefillin Tisha B'Av morning, which is not done by Ashkenazim. And he said that if it happened to be that someone who doesn't have that custom davens in their shul Tisha B'Av morning, they should know that because of the halacha of lo tizgodedu, they would have to wear talis and tefillin, that you have to join in with the minhag of the shul and not to be davening in the shul, yet doing something distinctly and visibly different from what the shul is doing. So the Shem Mishmuel brings a perush from his father to explain this. The Ramban explained that the Isur of lo tizgodedu, the idea of not cutting ourselves or tearing hair out in despair over someone who died, which apparently was done in different societies, is because Am Yisrael understand kiyum hanafashos. Our approach to mourning is not the despair of feeling that someone has disappeared entirely. The nefesh exists. The nefesh remains connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, right, we are Am Kadosh. We are Bonim LaHashem. And therefore, a person should never think that a nefesh is gone or disappeared. And there's a principle of Labal Yidach Mimenu Nidach. The nefesh will continue its journey, eventually reaching the point of closeness to Hashem that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for and from all of us. So to react in despair, to self-mutilate in different ways, shows that a person doesn't believe that that one who died in their true essence still exists. The Zohar Kodesh points out that death is a transition, is a travel in which the nefesh goes to a better place, so to speak, and the guf, the body, is buried. Now one might ask, okay, but isn't that a tragedy? This was a living body. This was the person that I knew and interacted with in life. And here it's dead and going to disintegrate. So the answer is that we shouldn't pay attention to the guf in that way. We have to understand that the guf alone has no independent value. The guf is a vessel, a tool of the neshama, of the nefesh. It helps it get around in the world, do what it has to, and the avodas Hashem of the nefesh is only meaningful in this world through the combination of physicality and spirituality. So nothing happens to the nefesh with the fact that the guf is now disposed of. In fact, the nefesh now, freed from the guf, is able to travel on into other worlds that are, he said, tavin v'shapirin, that are even more beautiful and wonderful. Our tsar, which we do show in mourning, is that we miss the person. This person was with us in a way that we were able to interact with them easily in the same reality. So just as a person can shed a tear when someone close to them travels far away, so too we shed tears in mourning, but it's not that despair of feeling that the person has been annihilated, so to speak, and disappeared. So the idea of agudos, the idea of separate groups in Am Yisrael being cut up and split up, he said this really comes from a sense that we're separate from each other. That idea of different gufos. The idea of a separate body, when I look at another person, I feel so separate from them because I'm in my body and he's in his body. But in reality, all of Am Yisrael are one nefesh in our root. So therefore, he says, the more spiritual we are, and this is a theme that Shem Mishmuel has touched on many times, the more ruchni we are, the more in tune we are to the true reality, so then the less separate we are. So the same reason we're bonim la Hashem Elokechem, because our true connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is spiritual, and that doesn't disappear even when the nefesh separates from the guf. That's also the same connection that connects two different Jews. If we think even in terms of family relations, Boni matem laHashem Elokechem, if I'm truly a child of Hashem, so then another Jew is my brother or sister. The more I absorb one reality, the more I also connect with that second reality. So in the same way that we don't despair because of that spiritual reality, at death, the same way we have to realize that we shouldn't be cut up and separated. A Talmud Chacham I know in Eretz Yisrael pointed out the negativity of a certain word used in modern Hebrew. In discussing different groups, oftentimes in terms of marketing or other things, they'll use the word a migzar. They'll call it a migzar, literally meaning a sector. Now, migzar in Hebrew means to cut, so to segment. A migzar is a segment of society. He said that's a terrible word. That's a word that doesn't match the Torah's hashkafa of who and what we are. Jews are never meant to be and are not cut from each other. We're am echad, we're nefesh echad, and that's important to see. Now, the question is, right, how can we have machlokas, which is viewed as legitimate, and if it's l'shem shamayim, even positive, and how does that combine with this idea of lo tisgodudu, not being agudos? Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos, the machlokas she l'shem shamayim sofa liskayim. A machlokas l'shem shamayim is going to last. That means that it enriches us, and it's part of what we have. For example, the machlokas of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The machlokas between them really comes from, he says, the shorish neshama of those approaches. A person's neshama connects to Torah, sees Torah, implements Torah in a particular way of this Shivim Panim LaTorah, the 70 faces of Torah. And we know that Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, that each of those legitimate Torah approaches are living words of Hashem. Beis Hillel, the Svarim say, comes from the side of Chesed. And that's why, in general, Beis Hillel comes out L'Kula. Beis Shammai is connected to Gvura, and therefore their netiyah, their tendency, is to Chumrah. Chazal pointed out the exceptions in which Beis Shammai is Mekel and Beis Hillel is Machmir, and those are unique exceptions that are meant to be noted. Nonetheless, he said, where does Lo Tisgodudu come into play? Even though we are enriched by different opinions, when you have one Beis Din or one city, which is going to have the minig of the city or the psak of the city, so then we have ground rules. Achrei rabim lahatas. The Beis Din will go according to the majority. And then the miut will be mevatel, their opinion, to the majority when it comes. In the same way, then he's referred to this before as well. We say, Oseh Shalom Bimromav. Chazal say this refers to Michael and Gavriel, that one is a malach of mayim, the other is a malach of fire. Both are creations of Hashem, both are legitimate. Nonetheless, since they're both botel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then Ose shalom bimroma, fire and water can actually join together. So too in the Beis Din. The two opinions are there in terms of the halacha, in terms of what should be done. But in the end, their decision, which goes by the rules of the Torah, of Acharei Rabim Lahatos, means that they are all being batel to their true source, which is Ratzon Hashem. On Rosh Hashanah, we're going to start saying in the davening, Hayom Yamid B'Mishpat, Kol Yitzur Elamim, Im Kavonim, Im Ka'avodim. That there is a din of bonim or as avodim. Do we serve Hashem as children, or do we serve Hashem as avodim? What's meant by that? And aren't they both positive? We use both terms. Moshe was called an Eved of Hashem, right? We're also told in this parsha, Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokechem. What's the difference? So he explains. Sometimes a person has the aspect of ben, sometimes Eved. Ve'elu tzadikim gemurim dinhu. People who are serving Hashem in the two ways are both tzadikim gemurim. Ha'hefresh ben bechinas ben lebechinas Eved. What is the difference between the avod of ben and the avod of Eved? He explains, based on the Zohar Kodesh, that the ben is someone who's totally at one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The ben doesn't feel like he's a separate entity, and therefore when he's doing what Hashem wants, he doesn't feel like he's doing something, a chesed for Hashem. And he doesn't think that even about the reward that he'll get for it. The tova of Hashem is his tova. He's not even thinking about, just like a person, he says, doesn't say, okay, I'm going to do myself a favor, or I'm going to help myself out. His Ratzon and his self are one and the same. He says this person who serves as a ben is not even doing it in order to receive Olam Haba. He's not even doing it in order to reach Kirvas Elokim. The only reason he does it, he says, is like David HaMelech says in Tilim, Lasas ritzoncha Elokai chafatzti. What I want to do, Hashem, is your will. That's what's called total bittul to Hashem's Ratzon. What is the bechina of Eved, of the servant? He does remember himself. He does think of himself. There's me and there's Hashem. And he does what Hashem wants and almost feels a certain aspect of giving, so to speak, to Hashem with that. And there is a sense that he is going to receive benefit from that. So, therefore, a person can serve Hashem like this and like that. And that's what's important to know. The Shem Mishmuel emphasizes everybody has times in which they serve Hashem like a ben, sometimes like an Eved. Because they said, and this is such an important line to remember, Basar v'dam einenu omed tomid al matkonas achas. A human being, a flesh and blood human being, can never remain constant in a certain level or avoda of avodas Hashem. We change. Our lives change. We progress. We step back. We have different things, and both are very high levels, as he said. Both are tzaddikim gemurim, but even tzaddikim, it's an idea sometimes like Ben, sometimes like Eved. And this is something that we're supposed to know and understand. That's how we can have machlokas. He says machlokas is something ruchni, something emistic. A person has a shorish neshama, and that's the way he connects and brings out that aspect of Torah. He says that is an aspect of Eved. However, when it comes time that we have to look and say, fine, we have two opinions. Now what does Hashem want us to do? And we follow the ground rules of Torah as to what we're going to do, then that's the aspect of Ben. Then, even though I have my tendency, both sides in the argument are totally mevatel themselves to what Hashem wants to do. And therefore also, lo tizgodedu, a person can get very uppity. An Ashkenazi walks into that Srati Shul Tisha B'Av morning, and he says, who are you to tell me what to do? Do you realize that the greatest Rabbanim in Ashkenaz didn't wear tefillin on Shachars? That's my minig, that's my father's minig, my grandfather's minig. Who are you to tell me, right, what not to do? That's not looking at what Hashem wants. That's not being mizbatel to the ben. The person's feeling like an Eved Hashem. I want to do what I do. I want to follow the minig of my community. Okay, but pay attention and remember what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. I heard a story years ago about someone who learned in Chaim Berlin and was going to be spending Shabbos in Washington Heights. Now, in the community, the Breuers community in Washington Heights, and this was common in communities in Germany, other places, in Slovakia as well, that not everybody was allowed to put their talis over their head in davening. In Breuers, as I understood it, the minig was that only the Rav would cover his head with the talis in davening. The other people would all wear their talis over their shoulders and wear a hat in davening. So this young man happened to mention to the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Hutner Zatzal, he says, yeah, I'm going to be spending Shabbos in Washington Heights, but I'm not going to do that foolishness. I wear my talis over my head. Rav Hutner said to him, he says, you fool. He said, there are so few places nowadays that have an actual true minig hamokum, and you'll be able to fulfill the Torah's ratzon, to follow the minig hamokum, and not to transgress lotis godidu. How could you miss such an opportunity? I often speak, and the Shem Mishmuel has often spoken about the richness and the wonder of the variety that we have in the world of Torah and how important that is. Nonetheless, it's important to realize that sometimes a person gets so connected to their particular form of that variety, they forget that what's above all is Ratzon Hashem. Bani matem l'Hashem Elokeichem. You are all one. And what unites us all is Ratzon Hashem and the bittul to Ratzon Hashem. No tisgodedu. Don't cut yourselves up. That separation and the idea of despairing and cutting oneself in over-mourning both come from the same root. Forgetting who we are, and as we remember that oneness in who we are, it gives us tremendous nechama and strength and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Wishing you all a wonderful week and a good Shabbos. Kol Tov.